So, guys, I have some theories on why the government is shut down.
What are your theories?
So, let me start with the one that has been least discussed in the public media. And ironically, it's sort of circular as to why it's been least discussed. I think the reason the government is shut down is because we shut down for like 6 months. And eventually, they couldn't take it anymore. No one is talking about how the government shutdown is linked to the fact that we, the podcast, shut down for a period of 3 months. And here's what I predict. Now that we are going back on the air, the government will soon be back in business too. And you could say that it's just a coincidence. But anyway, you heard it here first.
The government isn't not shut down, though.
No, only a quarter of the government is shut down. Three quarters of the government is not shut down. How come everyone's always so pessimistic? You never talk about the parts of the government that are not shut down. Everyone's all focused on the shutdown. No one ever says, the Department of Energy is fully funded through the fiscal year. No one ever talks about that. They always dwell on the negative.
Thanks, Rick Perry.
Is the Department of Energy open? I didn't know that.
The Department of Energy is fully funded.
So is there like a timeline in terms of like when things are open until? Because like they're fully funded until some time, right?
Through the fiscal year.
I think the courts have an operating budget of a couple of weeks.
No, DOE has a current appropriations bill. Like all of the money DOE needs for a long time is already appropriated.
But you're assuming that this government shutdown is like some sort of small affair. You know what I mean? Like it's just going to go on for like another week or two or whatever. But what if it goes on for years and years, as some have suggested?
If it goes on for years, then DOE will eventually run out of appropriations.
So one of the interesting things about the government shutdown has been, so I've been hearing these stories on NPR about how like basically volunteers are cleaning up the national parks and like stuff like that. Have you guys heard any of these stories?
Yeah.
Like and so I like that they're doing this, but part of me is like, you almost don't want them to do this in a way, right? Because like you don't want it to be like you don't want people to be like, see, it works fine. Like the government's working, like people are just taking up the slack. This is like that whole argument about how like we don't need the government to like do social welfare because like, the church will do it.
Yeah, but people aren't taking up the slack.
I mean, some of it they are, like Joshua Tree National Park, it's getting cleaned kind of.
Yeah. Have you guys seen the pictures of like the trash surrounding the White House?
No. That's awesome.
Donald Trump takes a jog every day around the White House.
No, he doesn't. So I don't know if it's been discussed on this podcast before, but one of the things that Donald Trump believes is that you have a limited number of heartbeats on your heart. So if you work out, you're just wasting heartbeats.
Yeah, energy is finite.
Yeah, exactly. So that's one of his strongly held views.
Core beliefs.
That's why he won't exercise. He thinks we're all stupid to be exercising.
Maybe he's right.
So how much of the shutdown do you think is an attempt by Trump to prevent Congress from investigating him? So, people are distracted by the shutdown. They're not focused on his financial affairs.
That's it. I hadn't thought about that, actually.
Congress will still investigate him, like, regardless of what everyone else is talking about. Like, it wouldn't actually, like, stop Ways and Means from getting his tax returns.
No, but as the shutdown goes longer and longer, it's difficult for the country and the media to focus on any one thing when the shutdown is the 600-pound gorilla in the room.
To be honest, like, the country's not even really focusing on the shutdown.
Why is that, do you think?
Well, then why are we doing an episode about the shutdown then?
I got a text message from Ruchit, and he said he wanted to do an episode on the shutdown, and then I was sort of reticent, and eventually I relented. And so I guess the answer is we're doing the episode because Ruchit texted me and you. But Ruchit's not the country.
So what is the country focused on?
Yeah, if not the shutdown.
I don't know. Bread and butter kitchen table issues, like Medicare and Social Security.
But so does anybody know how that works, by the way? Because I don't. Is like, how long do Medicare and Social Security and the like 60% of the government or whatever that's open, like stay in business, like, despite the fact that they have no funding?
I think most entitlement spending has permanent appropriations, so they don't need to be like approved year by year through the budget process. But you can just Google. I'm going to type into Google Social Security permanent appropriation.
Have you found anything of value?
Yeah, here we go. PolitiFact.com. Most federal spending is permanently appropriated, Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson says. Mandatory spending is 2/3 of the budget, includes Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. Unlike discretionary spending, which gets annual appropriations from Congress, mandatory spending is typically provided in permanent or multi-year appropriations. I don't know. PolitiFact rates this claim true.
I wish somebody would tell me how long it's going to be before, how long can this go on? Because can the government just sort of like fund itself and operate without an appropriations bill, like this much of it?
It's only a quarter of the government. It's just like the parks.
And the courts.
Yeah, but what do you need the courts for? The courts are all conservative. They're all full of Trump judges. They should be shut down forever, not just for like a few weeks.
Dude, I couldn't disagree more, AJ.
They are all full of Trump judges, except for the George W. Bush judges.
We don't have Trump judges or Obama judges in this country, AJ.
Well, we don't have Obama judges because the Democrats didn't ram their judges through. But we do have Bush judges and Trump judges. And they're all out there striking down the ACA and striking down the Voting Rights Act and denying victims of gender discrimination their day in court. Lilly Ledbetter, you remember that one? It's all Trump judges all the way down. That was a Trump judgment against Lilly Ledbetter.
I think that was a Bush judge, wasn't it?
Yeah, but the Bush judges are Trump judges, if you think about it.
I feel like there's quite a few Obama judges too. You know what I mean? And again, I disagree with this Obama. I'm with John Roberts on this one. It's not good to think of the judiciary as like that hyperpartisan.
Oh, I think that you're deluding yourself if you try to pretend that it's not hyperpartisan.
I mean, there are some partisan issues, right? I mean, but those are, I think that on those issues, maybe parts of the judiciary are partisan, maybe even up to and including the Supreme Court. But the vast majority of issues are not partisan issues.
The vast majority of issues are not partisan issues, but the vast majority of the judiciary is highly partisan, right? I think you're really drawing a false distinction here, right? Tom, what do you think?
No, I think you're drawing a false distinction, but go ahead.
I think AJ is saying that the judiciary is partisan on issues that he cares about, and Ruchit is saying if you consider all issues, the numbers don't suggest that the judiciary is partisan. It's a sample set issue.
Tom is right.
But like, okay, so the Senate is like extremely partisan, right? Like you would say like, oh, like Tom Cotton is very bad, whereas like Ron Wyden is very good, right? You would like have those opinions if you were a right-thinking person. And when they like both vote yes on renaming a post office, or even when they both vote yes on like, you know, renewing the Violence Against Women Act or whatever, right? You would say,
but I don't think they did that.
They did. Well, the Violence Against Women Act actually has lapsed because of the shutdown. One of the measures in the bill that Trump threatened to veto, so it didn't pass the House, was renewing the Violence Against Women Act. So now it's actually legal to commit violence against women. But you know,
I think it's actually still a crime to commit violence against women.
No, the Violence Against Women Act is expired. It's lapsed.
So committing violence against women is not criminal at the state level?
No, at the federal level.
And doesn't the Violence Against Women Act, isn't that not actually a federal crime, but actually a federal civil statute?
I think it's mostly just like a system of like grants and like programs that address violence against women. Anyway, but like when like if like Tom Cotton and Ron Wyden both vote yes on renewing the Violence Against Women Act, you wouldn't suddenly say that like our era of partisanship in the Senate is over, right? Like you would say, oh, this measure was not controversial, but you would still understand that like Tom Cotton and Ron Wyden are still highly partisan operators.
We didn't do much talking about the shutdown, though.
I think the shutdown's kind of boring.
We should really talk about the shutdown.
There's one really good article I found about the shutdown. It's this Matt Iglesias one. He says that the shutdown is intractable because Trump's wall is ridiculous and Republicans know it. And that, I think, is like, I don't know. I feel like that's like, maybe there's something I haven't thought of, but that seems to me like the most interesting thing to say about the shutdown. Basically, his point is that like the things that they're arguing about are dumb. But because they're dumb, there's no like path forward. There's no like tractable solution because there's no like smart answer. The thing that they're talking about is dumb. There's no smart way to reach a compromise on the wall.
How long do y'all think this? How long do y'all think this shutdown's going to last?
Well, let me answer your question in kind of a circuitous way.
Ooh, the Ruchit style.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. So Trump has had his back against the wall before his political life, right? And that's been in his many, many bankruptcies. And so I think the pattern he's following here is somewhat similar to what he does there, which is he's in the sort of huffing and puffing phase at the moment, but eventually I think what's going to happen is he's going to give in and declare victory while giving in. Because that's how he does it, right? He's like, okay, you guys can have the casino. The casino's terrible anyway, you know? So I don't know what the equivalent of that will be here, but he typically waits till he's like run the thing into the ground. You know what I mean? He'll really just keep going and keep destroying until like whatever he is that he's fighting over is like basically something you wouldn't want anyway. So in that sense, I think it could just keep going. It could go for a while. I think the only way this changes now, I don't think the Democrats are going to cave, and I don't think they should. Like, I think they should continue to do exactly what they're doing. Continue to pass bills to open the government and continue to have like Mitch McConnell and the Republicans do like nothing, I think they shouldn't give in at all. And I hope that they don't, candidly, because like you just can't negotiate with terrorists.
It sucks for all those employees that are not getting a paycheck, though.
It does. It does suck for them. I mean, it's very bad for them.
If this thing lasts, I guess several months, I wonder what kind of brain drain we will see from the federal government. Like, is the federal government, have they already lost valuable employees as a result of this?
Well, they've been losing them as a result of the Trump administration broadly, right? So, like, you guys remember, like, about how in the State Department, like, you had, like, tons and tons of, like, major diplomats, like, leave, right? Resign either in protest or just retire early because they didn't want to deal with the Trump administration. So I think this is all like, so Michael Lewis has his book, which I haven't read yet, but I've like listened to a couple of podcast episodes about it, called The Fifth Risk. Have you guys heard of The Fifth Risk?
No.
So Michael Lewis is typically like a financial author. Like he wrote The Big Short about the financial crisis. But so he's written this new book called The Fifth Risk, and it's basically like he calls it a love letter to government employees, to bureaucrats, because what he does is he goes and he covers the different things that our bureaucracies do. So like he goes into the Department of Energy and he talks about how like he interviews a bunch of people there, and he talks about how like the kind of lack of respect that we have for our bureaucrats, like, we're going to get the government that we deserve in a way. And so he talks about like one lady who saved, or one person, I forget if it was a man or a woman, who brought like some nuclear like recommissioning project. They brought the project in and completed it $15 billion under budget and several years early, like due to like the work of this like one person. Okay. In Colorado, I believe. And he was talking about how, like, in the private sector, that person would be like a billionaire, like if you saved $15 billion on something, like you would be a billionaire, but in the federal government, like that person is like just not respected. And so he talks about how like we're already starting to see this brain drain. And, how like there are all these really, really important things that the federal government does, and we just don't know about them. Like, Rick Perry didn't know that the Department of Energy, like, was in charge of the nuclear weapons. Like, he literally did not know that, Like, he didn't know that they were in charge of, like, safekeeping nuclear waste. Like, this is one of the 3 departments he wanted to eliminate, and he didn't even know what they did, And he admitted this, right? So I think you are going to see, like, if this goes on for months and months, you are going to see a brain drain. And it's very different, in fact, from how, like, other countries approach their bureaucracies, like in other countries, like the bureaucracies are like a prized possession. Whether you're looking in China or you're looking in like Germany or, even in Russia for that matter, where the civil service is like a very, very important function. I mean, these are the problems that we'll live with the effects of this shutdown and this presidency for like probably years and years to come, because like if you see the show that the government is in and you're a talented person, why would you go into the government? Before it would be that you wanted to do some good, but if with this much incompetence you can't even do some good, because you're certainly not doing it for the money.
But isn't that like what Republicans want?
Yeah, it is. It is. It's very consistent with what Republicans have said they want, right? This is a version of Grover Norquist's drown
the government in a bathtub.
I think he calls it starve the beast. Is that what he calls it? I forget what he calls it.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, that's a version of this, and I think most of them don't quite know like what the government actually does, whether it's like, safeguarding nuclear waste, or it's like keeping the national parks open, or any of these other things. There's just a complete disrespect for it. And because there's a disrespect, there's no desire to learn either. So in that sense, AJ is right when he says that Trump is just sort of he's just this sort of logical consequence of some of the policies and attitudes that the Republicans have been taking for a really long time.
Sad.
It is. This is not a happy episode. But I don't know, AJ, when do you think the government's going to reopen?
I think it's going to be a long time.
How do you think so maybe let's talk about a more interesting question. How will the government reopen? Like, what will happen to cause it to reopen, and what will be the conditions in which it reopens?
Well, I mean, they'll pass an appropriations bill and Trump will sign it.
What about a veto-proof appropriations bill?
Yeah, do you think that's how it'll happen? That's what I'm trying to get at.
No, I don't think that there are enough senators who would be willing to do that. I mean, so what? You would need to find... So a veto-proof bill has 67 votes. So, and there are 47 Democrats, so you would need to find 19 Republicans who would be willing to override a veto, right? Because just because you have a veto-proof vote doesn't mean that you're done. You actually, like, they have to actually vote to override the veto, right? So who's going to vote to do that?
Well, it would have to be very, very bad, right? I mean, it would have to be... We're not there yet. And I think it's because we've had so many shutdowns. I mean, we had the Ted Cruz shutdown in 2013. Do you guys remember that shutdown? I remember that one pretty well.
Mm-hmm. That one was embarrassing.
Yeah, because I was like, for me, I was like taking my dad to the national parks, and like, that was closed. And, we had to figure out other ways. Ted Cruz almost ruined our vacation.
Did you just sneak into the national park?
We went to some state parks.
Do you guys want to do some Supreme Court predictions?
Let's do it. But you guys didn't give me a good answer as to like what the conditions will be. It won't be veto proof. What will it be? Will the Democrats cave and give a wall? Like, what's it going to be? I want some speculation here.
No one knows. It's just sort of out there.
Can you speculate at least for me, dude? Can you at least do that? I mean,
I don't know. I mean, I think you're right? I think that, Republicans have less leverage here and will eventually give in, and then Trump will claim that he won even though he didn't, and then we'll like all move on. Like, he'll just do something where he doesn't get very much of what he asked for, and then he'll lie and say he got all of it.
Which, I don't think is a terrible outcome. You know what I mean? Like, if he gets absolutely nothing or very close to nothing, and then we just reopen the government, and, I mean, this is sort of how the Chinese were hoping to deal with him, right? Which is give him like absolutely nothing, but let him claim victory.
Yeah. Well, there's that like phone call. There's that like phone call transcript that was leaked in like early 2017 where Trump called
Peña Nieto, the Mexican president.
Yeah. And he said, "Hey, like obviously obviously Mexico isn't going to pay for the wall, but why don't you just tell your people you are paying for the wall even though you're not? And then we'll just move on." Right? Yeah.
I mean, he literally said that, Tom, do you want to get started on the Supreme Court cases?
Supreme Court predictions?
Indeed.
Sure. Let's start with a...
We're so behind. Like, what have our listeners been doing? Like, if you're listening to the show, kind of tweet us and let us know, like, what did you do while we were off? Like, what happened in your lives? How did you survive? Did you? I mean, were you just so wounded that you won't listen to our show anymore?
I don't think anyone cared.
Dude, I think we betrayed these poor people.
Who? Which people?
The people who listen to the show.
No, Richard, that's like 2 people.
Do you guys know about the non-delegation doctrine?
Yes.
I vaguely remember this.
So the non-delegation doctrine is the idea that one branch of the government should not delegate their powers to another branch of the government. So this sort of quasi came to a head in Clinton's term of president, where the Supreme Court struck down the line item veto.
Oh,
There,
right.
Congress gave the president the power to veto individual appropriations items in an appropriations bill, which is relevant to today's conversation. And the Supreme Court said you can't do that because Congress can't just give up their ability to make law and pass it off to the President of the United States. Okay? So recently there's been a case called Gundy v. United States where the issue is whether the Sex Offender Notification Registration Act, SORNA, delegates authority to the United States Attorney General to issue regulations and whether that delegation violates the non-delegation doctrine. Basically, under SORNA, sex offenders have to register in every state where the offender resides, where the offender is an employee, or where the offender is a student. It's a crime not to register. SORNA also gives the Attorney General the power to determine the applicability of SORNA to sex offenders who were convicted before SORNA was passed in 2006. And so that issue the case presents is whether that delegation is a violation of the non-delegation doctrine, whether letting the Attorney General of the United States determine whether a law is retroactive or not is a violation of the non-delegation doctrine.
Okay, before we go into the merits and et cetera, AJ, can you please state for the record whether this is a partisan case?
No, I can't. There are always partisan operatives.
Even on this case?
Yeah.
Will they be acting as partisan operatives on this case?
They always act as partisan operatives because they are partisan operatives. So the actions that they take are actions taken by partisan operatives.
That seems weird. Go ahead, though, Tom.
That's it. That's the entire issue. Now you guys have to make a prediction.
So I think this one's going to be a 9-0, dude. 9-0. This is delegation.
Okay. 9-0 Gundy for Ruchit.
Wait, tell me one more time. So what is the actual regulation that the Attorney General propounded?
So Congress allows the Attorney General the power to determine whether SORNA applies retroactively, so before the passing of SORNA in 2006.
Right. But what did the Attorney General do?
The Attorney General passed a regulation that says, yes, SORNA applies retroactively.
Like, that sounds like a law, not like a regulation. Do you know what I mean?
Regulations are laws.
Wait, so here's my question. Do you think Congress could have said SORNA is retroactive?
Yes.
Okay. Is that in the court below? Is that sort of like undisputed?
I don't know whether it was disputed or not in the court below.
But it seems like not an issue.
But the assumption is that Congress could have done that.
What are the criteria that the Attorney General has to use to determine whether it should be retroactive or not?
Off the top of my head, I don't know.
All right. I think it's 7-2 that it's an impermissible delegation.
Who are your 2 dissenters? Breyer
and Sotomayor.
So to give you an idea of how long this case has been sitting on the docket and unpredicted, my prediction is 8-0 for Gundy. From a time in which there was only 8 votes on the court to be had.
I love it.
We got one more case, and this is Gamble v. United States, and the issue here is whether the court should overrule the separate sovereigns doctrine exception to double jeopardy of the Fifth Amendment. Double jeopardy clause of the Fifth Amendment.
Okay, so this is an extremely politically controversial case.
Yes. The issue here is, under United States current law as it exists right now, if you break a law in the state of Texas, State of Texas can charge you for that conduct. But the feds can also charge you for that same conduct under federal law if it's a violation of federal law as well. This is the idea that both the state and the feds are sovereigns, and double jeopardy, the idea that you can't be charged for the same crime twice, applies only to a single sovereign.
Why is it controversial, AJ? Like, explain the background for our listeners of why this, like, otherwise, double jeopardy, who cares, blah, blah, blah. Why is it controversial?
So here's what's controversial about it. So I don't know if you have been keeping up, but the president is a criminal who did crimes. And a lot of those crimes are crimes at the federal and the state level, right? So, for example, the nonprofit regulation fraud with the Trump Foundation that the president has already admitted to. Like, the president has already agreed to no longer have the Trump Foundation, to wind it down, to give away all the money and so forth, right? Like this, I'm not like projecting anything here. The president admitted that the Trump Foundation should no longer be able to operate in New York, right? That, I think it was a federal crime and a state crime.
He even shut it down.
And then, yeah, he agreed to shut it down. And right. So, that probably was a federal crime and a state crime. And in a lot of cases, a lot of the Mueller investigation and so forth, if Mueller gets shut down by, the new Attorney General Barr, who said previously that he thinks it should be shut down, then, a lot of those investigations would continue under state laws. Now, if the president were to pardon someone, let's say the president pardons Paul Manafort, well, under double jeopardy, he can't be tried again for a crime that he's been pardoned. But because the state is a separate sovereign, New York could prosecute Paul Manafort, even if Trump has pardoned Paul Manafort at the federal level. So that's sort of like the effect here, right? It actually has like a lot of significance to the nuts and bolts of how the Mueller investigation will continue and what the effect of the Mueller investigation will be.
Well, the other flip side of that, I would say, is that it has a lot of effects in the criminal justice realm, where criminal defendants are often charged both in federal court and in state court for crimes for the same underlying conduct.
Right. I mean, there would be like a wide range practical effect on like the criminal justice system, but the thing about it that makes it like politically contentious is how closely related to the Mueller investigation the legal issue is.
Man, this is one of those where, in my view, like, double jeopardy should not apply to these poor criminal defendants.
But keep going.
Because like I think like it's the same set of facts. It's the same underlying conduct, so it does seem unfair as applied, I guess you could say, to the poor criminal defendants. But it doesn't seem so unfair when applied to Paul Manafort, especially if it's applied because he has been like, corruptly pardoned by Trump. So this one is hard for me.
Well, as a textual matter, it seems clear to me that it's not a double jeopardy issue, just as a textual matter, right? So actually pull up the double jeopardy language in the Bill of Rights. Give me a second to pull it up. This is like in the Fifth Amendment, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so here's what it says. Nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb, right? So basically what it's saying here is that for the same offense, you can't twice be put in jeopardy, right? Okay, but as a textual matter, right, the federal law and the state law are not the same offense. They're different offenses, right? Like one is 17 USC 1924 and the other is Texas Penal Code section 13.480 or whatever, right? Like those are made up. But you see what I mean, right? Like just as a textual matter, they're not the same offense.
Sure. The argument on the flip side is that when this law was passed, the framers had an idea in mind when they were implementing or writing down the double jeopardy clause, and the idea that they had in mind was in relation to the law, the double jeopardy law as it existed at the time, and the appellants brought up examples, few examples of how the British would not prosecute based on, a foreign sovereign, so like Spain, for example, prosecuting for the same underlying conduct.
So it seems like, as a textual matter, what Tom is saying is in contradiction to what you're saying, AJ.
Yeah, I mean, so what Tom is saying is that other countries have had broad readings of what is or isn't the same offense as another thing, right?
Yeah. What I'm saying is, as a textual, you have to interpret the text in light of the history, and you can't just, just to read the text without the history or context is a wrong way of interpreting statutes.
I think yours is the wrong way.
I mean, no, I'm not. I would disagree with that.
But you also have stare decisis here, right? Like the dual sovereign precedent is pretty, like, how old is it?
It's really old. It's decades old.
Yeah, and actually the Supreme Court did go the other way in the 19th century, right? So in the 19th century, the Supreme Court rejected a dual sovereign theory. And then in the 20th century, it adopted a dual sovereign theory, and then that has been the precedent for several decades now.
But that's the entire issue in this case, is whether they should overrule the dual sovereigns exception to the double jeopardy clause, right? And the argument that the appellants are bringing up is, look, 28, maybe not 28, but there are a number of states in numbering in the 20s, somewhere in the 20s, that already have this rule as a practical matter. That is, they've passed a law that says if you've been charged for the same conduct, we're not going to charge you under state law.
Oh, interesting. Is New York one of those states, or any of the other states where the president has committed crimes?
But they're not those states aren't necessarily rejecting the dual sovereign theory, right?
Yes, that's exactly what they're doing.
No, they're just saying that they're not going to prosecute someone, right? Like if those states.
Wait, that's a rejection of the dual sovereign theory, right? Like they're saying
No, right? So like I have the right to go buy a burrito, but I could choose not to while still believing in my right to go buy a burrito, right? Like these states are saying we could prosecute you, but we won't. But they're not disavowing that like, all right. And in fact, the law that they passed could only be meaningful in a dual sovereign context, right? Without a dual sovereign context, those laws would be meaningless.
They're not saying the dual sovereign exception doesn't exist. What they're saying is we think it's bad policy, and so we're enacting better policy.
I'm just saying you can't, like, just because a state has such a law, you wouldn't be able to say that it's because the state has rejected a dual sovereign theory or because the state thinks that, like, the dual sovereign theory is wrong or whatever, right? Like, there are all sorts of reasons why states could be doing that.
Well, I think what you can say is they think that it's bad policy, and so they've passed competing policy that they think is better, or at least the legislature at the time that passed the law.
So 28 states is like barely over half of the states, right? So approximately half don't want to use their prosecutorial resources in this way, and the other half do.
The other half just hasn't opined, it seems.
Oh, so how come when the other states haven't done anything, you can't read anything into it?
Well, because action is something you can read more into than inaction, right? Like,
no, I don't think you can read much into what any of the 50 states are doing with respect to the dual sovereign situation. So who's going to win?
Well, that's what you have to predict.
I think the dual sovereign theory will be upheld.
Okay. By how many votes?
Rich, how many votes?
I thought you were going to say how many votes.
No, I don't know how many votes.
I think it's going to get struck down.
You think so?
I do, and I think it's going to be a weird one. I think it's going to be. I think you're going to get Roberts and Gorsuch.
The liberals, I don't think will vote to reverse the dual sovereign holding.
So Richet thinks it's what, 7
6-3.
6-3.
Wait, Rooch, why did you call them the liberals?
Just to make them familiar to you, AJ. just so
But
it would be easy.
what makes
for
you call them the liberals? Like
AJ, can you make your prediction before you go down this tangent?
I think it is. So the 4 liberals, I think, will uphold. And to me, the real question is like, how many conservatives go with them? And I could see 0 conservatives going with them, or I could see, all of the conservatives doing it. I actually don't know what the answer is.
Well, you have to make a decision.
6-3, uphold the prior precedent.
Okay, so 6-3 United States.
But who's gonna come over from the liberal
No,
side?
all of the liberals, right?
Oh, okay. So who's gonna come over from the conservative
I don't know.
side?
I think it's going to be 9-0 United States.
Ooh, dual sovereign stance.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to strike down the dual sovereignty exception.
I think a good way to handle this is for the court to continue allowing the dual sovereign exception, and then for if should Trump pardon Manafort and other folks, they can be prosecuted, and then after that, the states can change their laws. After we've dealt with this one major issue, guys, good episode.
Was it? Do we have Richard? What is your sidebar?
My sidebar is a book called Endurance. It is about Ernest Shackleton and the HMS Endurance, which was a ship that he led for a polar expedition. So the book takes place in like 1914, 15, and I believe 16. And Shackleton was trying to become the first man to walk across the South Pole, I believe, or to walk across Antarctica. And he was a pretty famous explorer even before this, but he gets shipwrecked and crazy shit happens. And should I spoil the ending? Should I spoil what happens? I don't know.
Does he eat polar bears?
I don't think he eats any polar bears, but they eat a tremendous amount of seals and penguins. Like they would kill like 80 penguins in a day sometimes. And they do eat dogs. But anyway, it's an incredible story of human survival and endurance. I mean, they are shipwrecked for something like 18 months, and eventually Shackleton has to lead a small group of 5 men in a rowboat where they have to row 800 miles across the most treacherous ocean in the entire world. And they basically have to go from one point to another point without any GPS, navigating by the stars. And then when they get to that other point, which if they had missed, they would have had to go another 3,000 miles all the way to Africa to get to land. They end up having to climb over a mountain range, which is like 14,000 or 15,000 feet high. Then they go over the mountain range only to find out they went over the wrong mountain range. And then they have to go back. And then they have to go again. But anyway, that's the story. It is a really amazing book. It was written by a guy named Alfred Lansing in the 1950s and has recently had a renaissance of sorts.
Oh, I got a book as a sidebar too.
Yeah, nice.
My book is not a historical. It is fiction and I think fantasy maybe. Wikipedia describes it as science fiction, high fantasy, and urban fantasy.
Urban fantasy.
It is by a local Austin author, Robert Jackson Bennett, and it's called Foundryside, a novel. It's a very, very quick read. It's very entertaining, and I suggest you read it. The plot centers around a lady who is hired to steal something, and things happen, and it's fun for all folks involved.
All right, everyone open your web browsing window. If you're listening to this in the car, pull over to the side of the car, of the road. Pull over in your road. Pull over in the car. Go to twitter.com, but don't stop there. Keep typing. Twitter.com/AOC_dances. DANCES. Did you do it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so this is a Twitter account where they take that YouTube video of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez dancing when she was in college, and they just change the music. So you can get a little video of Ocasio dancing to any song you want. Like if you want where she's dancing to the Gin Blossoms, you've got that. If you want one where she's dancing to Delicate by Taylor Swift, you've got that. If you want one where she's dancing by Panic at the Disco, that's an option. If you want her dancing to the Beatles' Glass Onion, that's a choice. If you want Viva Las Vegas by Elvis Presley, yeah, that's right there too. If you want Miserlou by Dick Dale, yeah, that's definitely one that they've got here on this Twitter channel. Or maybe you want to see Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez dancing to At the Drive-In by their song One Arm Scissor. Yeah, that's a choice. You can click on that. If you want her, if you want to see her dancing to the Wii Shop channel music from the Nintendo Wii gaming platform, then yeah, you can totally see that here on this Twitter channel. If you want to see,
or to Ice Cube's Arrest the President. Right?
Yeah, Ice Cube's Arrest the President. That's a thing that you can see here on this Twitter channel. Or Don't Stop Me Now by Queen. You know, I'm traveling at the speed of sound.
I'd like to point out that this account is run by Leftist Hot 420.
Oh, Tom, I have to correct you. It's not run by Leftist Hot 420. It's run by Leftist Thought 420.
I don't know.
No, Leftist Thought. THOT.
Or Mambo number 5. That's an option too.
Yeah. If you want to see Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez dancing to Dead or Alive, You Spin Me Round, parentheses, like a record, close parentheses, that's a choice. John Denver, Country Roads, yeah, they've got that. LMFAO Party Rock Anthem, oh yeah, I'm right now, as we speak, I'm watching Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez dance to LMFAO Party Rock Anthem. They have every option here on this Twitter channel by Leftist Thought 420.